Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining me today. We're looking at lesson 7, and part of that's going to be our site cross section, as well as, gosh, I better look, local ecological survey. Cool. All right. So what I will do here is just share my screen. There we are. Okay. So maybe we'll shift things up a little bit on this for this meeting, and we'll touch on lesson 7. But I know that we had a question. I had a question in a lesson 6 assignment, and it was Sean's question. So I thought maybe we'll touch on lesson 7 today a little bit, but we can also take a look at kind of any questions anybody might have outside of this lesson in particular. So I want to make sure that people are getting good value for their experience here. Right. Okay, so yeah, if we look at lesson 7, the first part's pretty straightforward. We're just taking a look at local ecology, and we're going through that state of succession that the land is showing. We're looking for pioneer plants within the ecosystem itself. And we want to determine what state of succession various parts of your project site are in. And it's actually a really helpful exercise to go through if you consider that, in general, land itself wants to reach its climax. So where I live, it's a coastal Douglas fir forest, and no matter what we do here, if we cut trees down and we like, for instance, the property I live on is 5 acres, and probably 3 acres when we moved in here 27 years ago, 3 acres was cleared for pasture. And over the last couple of decades, we've let it revert. So it's now got sort of mid-succession planting, well, not plantings, mid-succession plants in it, such as red alder and small Douglas fir trees, as well as it's had some invasives with Himalayan blackberry, trying to speed that succession along a bit. So it is a really useful exercise to go through and to consider when you're looking at other properties. And if you're seeing a lot of pioneer plants in your, say, a walkthrough on a new project site, that tells you a lot. That tells you there's been some disturbance. It tells you there may be some compaction. And again, they are trying to heal, on a very macro scale. They're trying to heal the land. And often we see that in a different light. So we want to certainly take note of that. And it's also really a good thing to consider. Let's say you were a market gardener growing annual vegetables, and you know that you're going to have to, try and hold that soil in a certain succession in order to be successful with what you're doing. If you tried to grow lettuce in an old growth forest, you'd find you have very, very little success. And it's not just because of, let's say, low light conditions. A lot of it has to do with the fungal dominance of these older forests. So they need to be, for the fungal organisms to be thriving in an environment, they need to be left alone, and they do not like disturbance. So even in a compost pile, you'd want to be mindful of how often you manage that, how often you turn it if you're trying to create a compost that has a really wide variety of organisms in it. So it's quite fascinating, and stuff we can't see what's going on with our naked eye as far as the soil microbes go, but we can certainly see the result in the vegetation. So yeah, so this is great to go through. We want to know 5 birds and a local food chain. So we could go to that template file here. Just take a quick peek at it. Right. Sorry about that. Gonna move along here. There we go. So yeah, this is a really interesting chart we want to take a look at, and you want to identify what successions, again, are visible on your site. There are some examples here. So if anybody's in sort of a semi-arid situation, or they're in an example of a climax community in Eastern US, there's lots of different ones there. And then, of course, these are your bird survey and your local food chain. So yeah, this is pretty straightforward. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. There are resources here, of course. So we're looking at that succession. We have a few resources right here. Yeah. So
I have a question.
oh yeah, please go ahead.
Couldn't find anything on this online to confirm what the succession plants are and what the pioneers are and what the timelines are for each of those. I found studies on like our native conifers, but I just couldn't find anything with like specific plants and their timelines within that whole succession time frame.
And
So
what
I just
about,
guessed, but that's not going to help me if I'm working with someone else.
yeah, well, I guess whereabouts are you again, Tabitha? Are
Cambridge
you,
Island.
aha, okay.
So,
So
and I live in an established old forest.
mhm.
So I hike around here, and I've seen a lot of clear cuts in the Olympics. So I know what the succession is, but I don't like I couldn't find anything online. I need to be able to figure out how to do that research.
It's actually not, it's the one thing that is a little bit tricky. Even getting definitions of uh, climax community, right? You get all sorts of definitions that may not really match up. So it may be that we need to change the wording a little bit here, because we're really focusing on the vegetation. But let me just try something here, which I haven't done before. So there's a PDF here that might be of use. Just have to do a little bit of digging. And funny enough, Douglas fir is a early succession tree, which I find bizarre, but sorry, I'm just flying through here to see if something sticks out. We're getting vegetation zones. That's not really telling us what we want to know. And I think in this case, they're really looking at fire and how that affects landscapes, which of course, that's a big part of disturbance. Yeah, so that might not be the best. Yeah, leave that with me, Tabitha. I'll try and find, just off the top of my head though, given where you are, things like bracken, right? So if
Fern?
I'm sure you see that a lot in
Yeah,
clear cuts.
yeah.
You're going to see alder. You're going to probably see what we call arbutus, which I believe in the US is more called madrone.
Madrona, yeah.
Uh, yeah, some of these are early.
Yeah, I live right. I mean, I just drove by a clear cut area that I used to hike in, and it is all Scotch broom. Like I've
Yeah.
never seen so much Scotch broom come in, but that doesn't. I want to be able to find this research if I'm working in another part of the country or the state.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
mean, yeah.
Well,
I know this place because I grew up here, but yeah,
sure.
I'm not finding the info online.
Sure. Okay. Well, leave that with me. I'll see what I can. Um, I'll even ask some of the instructors if they have some resources they could share.
Okay,
And I
thank you.
think in some ways these are, in some ways, we could look at this in generalities, right? So if we go back to this diagram in the template, and that's probably not, let me try and find another one here. Yeah, and this is somewhat descriptive. And you could apply this. You're not going to be applying this to the desert. Um, that's a whole different kettle of fish, drylands. But in general, when you get this initial disturbance, you're going to have a high fungal content in your soils, and that will dictate what starts to grow. So, as you know, if you scrape an area and you walk away,
Mm,
you're going to get a flush of annual weeds typically, right?
hmm. Yes.
So that's a very early succession. So that those plants are trying to build soil through rapid growth and short lifespan and the organics they leave behind until those organics build up and they can support more fungal dominant bacteria, or sorry, fungal dominant organisms, and which will allow for um, later succession plants to start to grow. So
Hmm.
even if you were down in, gosh, I don't know what a good example would be. You could lump broom into this, but broom's obviously a woody shrub. So, if you see a flush of broom, that there is a certain that soil isn't starting from scratch again. It's at least got a little bit of organic in it and a little bit of fungal properties in order to support the broom. And of course, we know the broom is nitrogen fixing and is trying to help. Um, Makes great compost actually when it's chipped up.
Hmm.
But if
So when you start to see woody plants coming in after the weeds and grasses and such, you're saying that's an indication of we're now starting to see higher fungal activity?
right,
Okay.
yeah, so that succession's moving along. So where can that help you? Well, let's say you have, I guess one of the prime things is when you have a new build. Say you've got a client that's just built a house. Typically, the lands around the house are going to look like a blast one off. It's all starting from scratch, and you're trying to incorporate these new plantings. You know that you're going to have to be extra vigilant to have um, you know growing medium in place that's going to support all of these organisms that are absolutely required for your trees and shrubs to be successful, because the organisms are responsible for the nutrient cycling within soil. So this is a good general to go off of. There's probably lots in here, lots of different diagrams saying the same thing. But the two are related, right? So if you don't have the soil organisms, you're just not going to have. This is a pretty good image there.
What was your search term for that?
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Tabitha.
What was the search term that you did for these images?
The search, I just went with soil succession.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would take, if you had a client that was in a climate that was very different to yours, yeah, you would have to do, a fair bit of research on more levels than one to bring yourself up to speed with that, right? Like if somebody dropped me in, let's say, the wet tropics, and I was designing a project there, well, it would take a long time to get acquainted with that. I wouldn't even know what a weed looked like there, believe it or not. I mean, I've not lived there. I've walked through there, but in a time in my life when I was less aware of plants. So, yeah, Stefan had a remark here in the chat. He suggested, have you researched any of the logging companies' websites? He's found some studies about clear cutting versus slash burning. So I'm not totally sure what.
I'll check that out. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I guess part of this is not looking so much at the specifics, but this sort of generality, right? So if you, like, for instance, on property I live, when we got here, we had 3 acres of pasture, and it was being held there by by cutting, right? So you're going in there and you're cutting, you're trying to hold that, and we let it go. We didn't want 3 acres of pasture, and so our invasive that really got going here was Himalayan blackberry. So that, again, that's the same thing. The succession's moving along and supporting more of a woody vine, right? And then before you know it, we have alders and firs coming up in the middle of some of these patches. So yeah, it's very interesting. So it can be very, very helpful when you're, so-called reading the landscape and trying to get a handle on, the opposite would be true as well. If you had a an area that was wooded that you have to they have to clear, say, to build a house, and then plant if you wanted some food crops in there, you got to consider that. This is where the soil food web testing is really, has a strong, strong consideration, is because it tells you what groups of soil organisms are currently alive in the sample you've taken, and based on what you're trying to grow, they'll certainly provide you with some advice on some of your treatments there. So
I'll put it in the document, but same question on finding the succession animals. I just guessed based on what I've observed, but couldn't find any information online for that. But I'll follow up with you later on that.
Okay. Well, that's an excellent question. So thank you for that. And let's go back. Where were we here? Okay. We were going to just take a peek at our site cross section here. And this one's a little bit trickier. I'm going to get Google Earth going here. That load up. Yeah, and this is a very useful tool. I don't use it that much anymore because the software I use has this 3D capabilities, so we can do section drawings, and I'll show you one that we've done, but it is a very useful tool just to get a really good feel for basically you're slicing into the landscape and flipping it up on edge. And so you get an idea of the contour or sort
Okay,
of.
I'm looking at your notes. Is anyone else seeing that? Or the dashboard? Or are you showing us something else?
No, I'm not on there yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for Google Earth to come up here. Okay, so I'll show you one method here that we could do. We can go just about anywhere. Look at all the beautiful logging. All right, so let us just pick a site here. So let's presume this is our project site right here. And we don't, maybe we have some topographic information for it through Contour Creator. But one of the ways you can get some section information from it, albeit, it's not going to be horribly accurate, is using Google Earth here. And what I should do, I want to share my desktop here because I don't think you're going to see some of the. There we go. Okay. All right. So with Google Earth, we just get where we want to go here. And if we hit the path key or the path button, and what we're going to do is we're going to draw, say, a line. And we can adjust that line anywhere we want. Let's say we go all the way to here. And then we just say OK. And that's going to pop up here at the bottom, bottom of our places. And we are then going to right click or do that context click and go to show elevation profile. And then we get an idea of the lay of the land here. And as you can see, the arrow's following my arrow here. So if you wanted, you could take this info and utilize that with your section drawing, right? You could trace that, you could do all kinds of things. Now, it's not going to be horribly accurate because Google just isn't. It's pretty low resolution. So that is one way to do it. Go. And the other way, let me just see. Oh. There we go. This was a commercial landscape we did years ago, and they wanted a, as part of the design process, they wanted a section drawing. So fortunately for us, our software, and I'm sure Chelsea could chime in on this too, as she's a landscape architect, and I'm not sure what software she's using, but
I generally use AutoCAD and SketchUp and Photoshop is something like
Right.
this visual.
Does AutoCAD do sort of provide you with section drawings?
You can export sections out of it, but I find it simpler to model in AutoCAD and then cut sections in SketchUp.
Ah, okay. Okay. Yeah, so this this example is what was generated out of Vectorworks. And so you can see basically the sidewalk. It was a section that just ran down the side of the property. They wanted to see what the development would look like from the road. And that was not only the building, but all the proposed plantings here. So you can see how that can be very useful to get a feel for not only the lay of the land, but how the proposed landscape is going to appear, right? So regardless of who your client is. Let me just go back to. There we go. So if we walk through that process and we take a look here, there'd be some good examples. So again, you can use Google Earth if you wish. And this is the plan view. So that's the first thing we want to do is have your base plan with a line indicating where you're doing your section. So where we're cutting into the landscape. And then when we have each end of the line designated with, let's say, an A or a B, there's lots of ways to do it. Then we know which side of the line we're going to be observing the cut from. So here's that. I don't think it's that exact example. Oh, yes, it is. Okay. So there's the example. And the student has utilized all of this topographic information. So it comes up to basically a hill and drops down on both sides. And then they've placed some significant landscape elements here. So they've got a compost bin and a number of trees. They're showing a driveway. And in this situation, they could have shown the building behind. Had a number of students that have displayed some really interesting graphics on this particular assignment. Some people will show, for instance, they'll show the building behind, but they'll put it in gray. So there's all sorts of ways of doing it. I would advise, I would think it's actually a great idea to have any structure behind it. It gives you a bit more of a kind of visual relationship with what's going on. And then down at the bottom here, there's room for succession stage to be placed and microclimate. And then there's another example here. And in this one thing that is really helpful to keep in mind is we want to have a 1-to-1 ratio here, and that should be stated. Yeah, here we go. So we want the horizontal and the vertical axis to be the same scale. So this does place limitations on your section drawing. Let's say you can see here, if you have a 200-meter long section drawing and you're going up at the same scale, this will all be proportionate. So that's one reason we want that. We want to see proportionately how it'll look. but it may also start to dwarf a lot of the landscape elements here. So, you know, that's a plus and minus. Often with, say, civil engineering, they will change that ratio. So they'll exaggerate the vertical because they want to show the detail, and it's really not, you know, they're not trying to show you the landscape and how it appears. They're just trying to get information across to the contractor. All right, so Nancy has a question we should answer here. And should we have a different thing on slides 98 and 99? Yeah, that's right, Nancy. 99 is an example. And one way you could set up your sheet. This has the cross section above and photos below, and this is similar but different. So yeah, you can choose any which one you want. And 98 here is your plan view. This would be your overhead view and showing the section line and an A and B on both sides, or however you want to designate it. It's just so that when we go to look at it, we know in this case, we're looking on this side. If that makes sense. All right. So let's see if we've missed anything here. Is anybody confused by this, or have I missed anything that you feel is important with it? I'm not sure if we have what we have in resources for this. So we do have some videos. So we've kind of just touched on Google Earth. You can also, if you don't want to use Google Earth, you can just use the topographic data you currently have. How to measure a tree. That can be helpful when you're, because that's one thing we want to know here is when we look at this, we want to have an idea of some of the heights of these trees. Probably shows a little better there. Yeah, so so these have been labeled, and there's some photos above, and they're telling us the height of the trees. So, right. And let's see here. I think that that about covers it. The ratio is important. I had one student who had, gosh, it was about a 200-acre farm, and she did a number of sections and changed the ratio because she couldn't fit everything in. So, you know, that works. I can understand it. It's just, it does shift the proportion of all of the landscape features. So all of a sudden the lay of the land changes, right? As well as all those landscape elements and how they relate to each other. So one thing I would definitely recommend is you check out the rubric here and just make sure you're including everything that's asked for. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Now we have a couple of questions in our Q&A document we should take a look at. Yeah, I'll follow up with that, Tabitha. So I'll definitely look into that later today. So we covered that. So you're having a debate how water moves and the best way to catch it. So you're on a well. Much runoff. What goes to the aquifer from where, and what goes to local rivers? Well, that would be a really hard thing to determine.
I think maybe you and I could have a separate conversation about this because I'm definitely still struggling with understanding hydrology and how it all works and how and when to go about different types of capture in different scenarios. I don't want to dominate everyone's time. So maybe, I don't know, Jamie, can you and I have an offline conversation on that?
Oh, sure.
'Cause I feel like
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
don't.
not getting it, like it's not clicking for me. The whole,
Well,
like the big picture of it all.
well, we have time, so I don't mind discussing it right now. I think Sean has a question here. We're going to go over that. So how about we touch on it for a couple minutes here, and if you need more time, we'll make sure that we schedule something for you.
So
Yeah,
let me just ask, the basic idea is
sure.
that water could go one of two ways on a broad scale. It will either run off into our streams and rivers and then head to the ocean or go directly into the ocean, right? Or it goes down into aquifers. Is that which are more localized?
Yeah, which well, let's look at.
But then I don't understand how aquifers are fed. Are they fed from our runoff starting in the mountains?
Yeah, it's an interesting cycle. So if we look at something like this, you can
Okay.
see how the answer to your question is it's not straightforward
This
at
is
all.
great, actually.
So we
This
have
is
this
awesome.
cycle, and
Okay.
it's in this situation, we're starting with water in the ocean that's evaporating, condensing, and then falling. And this is very general, but I don't know if we want to really factor in volcanic steam, but I suppose it's part of it. But the precipitation and at higher elevations, that snowpack, and then it's slowly running off, hopefully slowly running off, entering streams and heading down basically back to where it started, right? So everything ends up back in the ocean. And you can see, even if it infiltrates into the ground, that groundwater can end up back in the ocean.
Okay.
It may not. It may stay underground. I'm trying to remember where it was. I think it was some work Andrew did in India with some of his videos talking about farmers drilling wells, 5, 6, 7,000 feet deep, like incredible depths to find water, and how they had a term for the water. It was like prehistoric or ancient, or
Mm-hmm.
it's water that has been infiltrated, and it's not going anywhere, or at least it's moving in a very slow manner.
Okay.
And we probably should be leaving that alone. Fossil water, yeah, it might be, Sean. So it is always in motion,
Okay.
right? And it's either going from one state to another, so from liquid to vapor to solid, back to liquid. And so in a general sense, I think a lot of this has to do with the context of your project. So most of us live in the Pacific Northwest. We get an abundance but not all of us, but most of us get an abundance of water during the winter. And then we have more dry, drought-like conditions during the summer months. So that's sort of the whole crux of trying to slow the movement of water down as it's going through your site, and where storage comes in for
Mm-hmm.
reuse later.
Okay.
For instance, where I live, we installed quite a large rain garden. It's probably kind of 30 by 50, something like that. And that's where all of our stormwater goes. And some of our roof water, when we collect rainwater for use in our vegetable garden, but when we're filled up, we're topped up, it goes into our rain garden, because we don't want that just running off into a ditch down to the ocean. We would prefer to have it held within our property, and holding it in your soils is one of the lowest cost ways of doing it, right? So
by
if
holding it in your soils, does that mean then that you just need less supplemental irrigation in the summer because your soil is a little more saturated? Or does
it
it
can,
mean you've put more into your aquifer, so you have more water to pull from in a well?
it can. Where we have a rain garden currently,
Yeah.
we noticed, and we just installed it last fall. We noticed this summer was brutal, very dry, but our orchard below our rain garden did incredibly well. It was full of fruit. The bears had a great time destroying our trees, and yeah, it was extremely evident that this extra water that we've been, and we're talking thousands and thousands of gallons of water, thousands. Like the rain garden will hold, when it's at capacity, and it's just about to overflow, that's about 3,000 gallons just sitting on the surface. And I have sandy loam here, so it infiltrates very quickly. So
Okay.
within maybe 8 or 10 hours, the whole thing will be empty.
Okay.
Provided the rain has stopped. Now we've been playing with the idea of doing the same thing near our wellhead, because I can tap into a little spring and direct it close to our well and just do a big pit there. So I have been contemplating that, because our area, we've never run out of water, but our neighbors have. So I feel that we're, it'd be proactive of us to just keep trying to recharge with high quality water. But we don't know, right? I have no idea what effect that would be. We just know that it would be, it's probably going to be more effective than not, right? So right now, I probably have 10 gallons, 20 gallons a minute of water running out to a roadside ditch from the spring that's on the top of our property. And if I redirect that, and that's infiltrating into the ground around my well, logic tells me that that's going to benefit it.
So that rain garden in the summer is dry, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really about hydrating that soil when you've got the water available, saturating it as much as possible so that it retains some of that as we go into the drier months in the summer.
Yeah, and you can, if you look at say typical section drawings of a swale here, I'll try and find the one that this is. So I've heard this called a water lens, a lot of different bits of terminology for it. How accurate is this? I don't know. I've just seen this philosophy quite a bit, where you end up with this lens of water beneath the soil where it wouldn't have been before. And that obviously is going to aid your, that's the whole premise of a swale. And the same thing with the rain garden, really. You're encouraging water to go down, even like this here, this bioswale, same type of thing. We're trying to remediate the water here, but we're also trying to hold it to support this plant material. So that's how I see it.
This is really helpful.
It's very general, and I don't think you'll ever, like, I'm not sure, you'd have to have some pretty sophisticated apparatus to be able to monitor, if you could even do it, monitor where water is going when it starts to head below the surface, because I know where I live, it's going to head down, probably be hit about at the 3-foot level. I've got hard pan, and then it starts to slide
Okay.
along that hard pan. But how is that sloped? It's not necessarily the same slope as the ground that we see. So, you know.
So an underground aquifer would be fed by both like overhead water and then water coming from runoff coming from mountains and
yeah, like
larger
where I
lakes.
live, we have this
Both.
aquifer above us, and it's fed by a number of different streams. We don't have any rivers where I am, but
Okay.
there's a lot of water moving through the landscape. But because they've been doing more logging, we're seeing the hydrology change. So instead of the trees holding that water, right, the forest holding the water with its root system and above ground, it's more prone to run off. Because, I mean, you look at this right here, how much water could turf grass hold versus
The trees,
the
right?
trees, right? So, yeah.
So if I'm capturing rainwater on my property, if I'm capturing runoff and holding it and slowing it down, and am I depriving my neighbors of water? Or could the reverse work if someone upstream of me is doing that? Does it impact my aquifer or my well? And I ask this question because we're having this debate on what happens when someone's well runs dry. Like what's happening on a bigger scale there? What made that happen?
Well, I guess some of it depends on the depth of the well. So where I live, they're drilled wells. They're probably 200 feet deep. And if somebody's well runs dry, you know, that whole, we'll look at that water lens again and imagine that's, you know, an aquifer that there's a well drilled into. It just means this level's dropped below the pump height, right? So it's just going down, and
Okay.
you no longer can pull that up until it's recovered. So that's pretty common where I am for people to run into trouble.
So the water's still there, it's just dropped deeper?
Well, you're deplete. It's being depleted. So most aquifers, like where I live, most of our major aquifers are on a depletion trend
Yeah.
because of increased population. So more straws in the cup.
Yeah.
So more water is getting pulled out, and it's a finite resource, and yeah, so it's a lot of it's, you know, I don't think most people on the Pacific Northwest are mindful of their water use because we get so much falling in form of rain during the winter months. But you know, certainly where I am over the last decade, there's been more and more interest in managing. And it's not only that, it's a combination. The beauty of all of this is you can manage your stormwater at the same time. So instead of getting flooded, you're redirecting that water into a place that you can, you know, safely infiltrate water into. So instead of the water where I live putting pressure on our foundation, we're redirecting it into a rain garden. So it can, that's at a lower elevation than our foundation. So it can fill up and drain all at once. It's not putting pressure on our structure here. So yeah, so I hope that makes some sense. And Sean's got a comment here. Seems like you and all your neighbors made an effort to slow and sink water as opposed to it running off. Yes, it's always a benefit if everybody's like my neighbor above us. You know, it's a degraded landscape. It's a 3-acre pasture that has probably a month of fertility during the year, and then it just burns off, and it has no water holding capacity. It doesn't have any woody plants on it. And, you know, the landscape suffers. We, on the other hand, are just always trying to send water into the ground, but do it in such a way so you're not causing any issues during the winter. So the two can couple together really nicely. And it's just a question of positioning these structures so they're not putting you at risk. So if I put a rain garden on the uphill side of our house, that wouldn't be a great idea, right? Because eventually that water's coming towards the house, towards the foundation. Yeah. So we have it on the away from our house, well away, 50 feet away, and at a lower elevation, so it's not gonna come uphill, let's say that. So,
but just above your orchard, you're saying was working for you, so that's
oh yeah,
also a good thing to think about, because right now I have mine at the very lowest point of the property, which is also on the corner of the property,
right,
you know, like
right.
the boundary of the property. So nothing would really, unless I'm recharging my aquifer, nothing would really benefit from that uphill, which is where my garden is.
Yeah,
This
and
is
that's the
helpful.
beauty of it. The rain garden will support plants within itself, but it's what it does beyond. That's quite, it's remarkable. Yeah, it is quite impactful. So I know that Sean's got a question here. How are you feeling about that, Tabitha? Do you feel like
good? I mean, I could get into a much deeper conversation about the whole circular situation of water and where is it going? Because we may consume water, but we're also getting rid of water, right? So it's kind of all going back, but I seriously don't want to derail the conversation anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's funny
That's like a
where
bigger question.
this part of the world, we've become, the architects and the engineers of the world have become experts at draining and paving, right? So really, when you think about it, with all the water that we can get hammered with during the winter, if the area is graded and paved, boom, it's out of there, right? It's in a stormwater system and gone. But then when you're having to pump it back in, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I know in other areas like Bend, where Chelsea is, I've had a couple students from Bend. They only get 12 inches of annual average rainfall. So, the water conservation motivation is there from the get-go. They know they've got to try and slow that water down as it enters the landscape.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can, we have a few more Q&As, so we can keep talking about water. There's no problem there. All right, I should get to Sean's question here because he had this in his assignment, and I thought it would be a good one to bring up here with the Q&A. So Sean's property, it's sloped. And it's like a stair step from top to bottom, and water flows over this compacted soil from the upper lawn and hits the foundation of the home. So we don't want that, because that obviously creates flood issues. And you're unsure where to direct and sink excess water, given that each tier of the property either has the home foundation or a retaining wall. So yeah, sometimes in an urban setting, you can't do a lot. So this is interesting. So that one thing, when I was looking at Sean's plan, was it looked like the front of the property might be a good spot for potentially for a rain garden, to take some of this excess water that's up in the back corner, get it away from the house and plant it in the front. So he's saying that he's got a retaining wall here. Now, the one bonus with this retaining wall is he has some pretty large weep holes at the base. So excess water that's building up here has somewhere to go, although I don't know how many of these weep holes there are.
I think the one you're seeing is the only one, and
Oh.
it's attached to it's terracotta, and there's a matching one just by the foundation that the gutter was at one point directed into.
Oh,
But
I see.
I don't think it's probably crushed by now. There's
Yeah.
very rarely water coming out of it.
Yeah, and those over
There's
time.
one just uphill from there. There's a French drain connected. So at the very closest end in that photo, the near end, there's some irrigation pipe coming out at the end of that wall, and that like right now I'm actually sitting right by it, and it's like a little waterfall. It's just pouring all that water onto the sidewalk basically, or into that little rock drainage, and then there is actually a weep hole under the sidewalk out to the street that does drain.
Well, that may be what you end up having to do, Sean, is just I don't have your do you have your assignment link handy that you could put in the chat? Is that, or no,
really.
you're on your
my
phone.
in my car.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing you could consider is, you know, it may be a situation where you don't want to infiltrate here because of the retaining wall, because you don't, you know, it's these are expensive, and you wouldn't want to put that at jeopardy.
Yeah, it's already got giant cracks in it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. You may want to try and link any little catch basin or drainage you put in with this outflow here, so that it is leaving the site.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing is
down to that and see if I could connect it.
And yeah, clay drain tiles are notorious for their settling and for, you know, getting plugged with root intrusion. You know, you can see this tree is probably into it a little bit. So you may even have to place a new PVC line in there, right? If you're wanting to ensure the water gets out of that area. It's, you know, there are, I mean, it's very, I guess, individual choice on that.
Yeah, that front yard doesn't hold water nearly as much as the back. The back upper lawn is really where where it just sits on the surface on top of that compacted soil.
Yeah. I think I believe that I recall you were saying a neighbor's shed drains onto it. Is that right?
Yeah. So they have a sort of garage. It's like an outbuilding that well, there's a corner of my property that gets all the uphill water, you know, coming down the contour to my property, and there's a roof line there that deposits all that water in that same exact spot.
Yeah, because that you know, that might be the place to capture it, right?
Yeah.
If you have surface water up there, just even a little I think I showed you this before. NDS is a brand. You know, we use these a lot in residential, something like this, right? You can get them in round or square. I think they come in 10-inch. No, there you go, 9, 12, and 18. So, you know, you may just need like a 12-inch catch basin, and even just a 3-inch outlet is often, you know, a 3-inch pipe can hold a lot of water.
But so as opposed to keeping that water on site, your recommendation would be to actually just take it away.
Well, if it's causing some issues with the house foundation, and then you're looking at the structure here, you know, you'd want to be 10 feet back from the retaining wall. So that's probably
and 10 feet from the foundation as well.
And then 10 feet from that. So you may not have a lot of space here. Now, you know, I guess there's some alternatives that you could look at, but rain gardens tend to be the easiest because they're so easy to see if they're functioning.
Yeah.
And I do love them, but they're not for every site. So,
Yeah.
you know, yours may be one where you just want to ensure that you've got good stormwater management as opposed to, you know, holding it and suffering some effects of that.
Okay.
Yeah. All righty. Well, I hope that helped,
Thank you.
Sean. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I probably what my idea is to put like a large cistern at that high spot so I can hold some of that water at the uphill end and then feed gardens, you know, garden beds as needed, you know, throughout the summer. It probably wouldn't last too long, but at least to capture some of it and use it.
Yeah, it's also what I've found, because we have a couple of, we have a 1,000-gallon cistern we use as a pump chamber, and then we have a small 50-gallon pump chamber in our setup. And the 1,000 gallons, almost like a surge, it's great for surges. So if we get an inch of rain, boom, I've got 1,000 gallons sitting there, and it hasn't been let loose in the landscape yet. So I can decide what I want to do with it. And right now I would then just drain it off into my rain garden, but that's a great idea. And I think you were saying you could even capture it right off of your neighbor's shed roof and direct it into your.
That's an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty low management, so I don't think they would. I mean, I'd talk to them, but I could probably attach a gutter and no one would be bothered.
Right. Yeah, he probably doesn't even see it, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
And it's just the roof. Is it asphalt shingle or?
It is.
Yeah. So just be careful not to put it on any edibles, right? When you go to reuse it.
Yeah. And that's a pretty hard and fast rule.
Well, you know,
even if it's, I mean, it's well aged.
Yeah, that's better.
Stored nicely.
That's certainly better. I know when I took some training from ARCSA, the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association, and the trainer was saying that his approach was that asphalt shingle roofing between the being new and 5 years to avoid reuse, and then after 5 years he figured most of the fire retardants and hydrocarbons were no longer an issue, but that's very unofficial. So I would be careful. There's no way of filtering it out effectively. So that's a nice thing.
That leads me to another question, because I'd like to, you know, one of my passions is sub-irrigation and raised beds, because I found it to be really effective.
Yeah.
But would that same recommendation apply? Like, is there any like the roots, the plants are going to be taking that water up, whether it's coming from above or below. There's no added benefit to utilizing that water in a sub-irrigation system. Is that correct? Do I understand that right?
Right. Yeah. That's right. So it's with annual plants, those compounds will end up in the tissues of the plants, and that's typically what you're consuming. The exception to that would be trees and shrubs. So if you had, say, raspberries, you know, what I've heard is that those compounds end up locked into the wood, and then the fruit is okay. But again, I don't have a peer-reviewed study to show you on that. That's just what I have heard.
But cut flowers should be no issue.
Oh yeah, or any ornamental garden would be fine.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a good idea. That's certainly one way of trying to maximize that resource and control.
And is there a way to test for that, for the pollutants in that, like, cistern water?
You could take a water sample and send it off for analysis, sure. There would be
All right.
people in your area that, let's say outside your area that have wells that have to have their water tested.
Sure.
So there'd be labs in your area.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
no problem. Well, we
Isn't
are,
one of the, sorry,
oh, go ahead, Tabitha.
isn't one of the concerns too with catching the runoff from a roof that you'll pick up the bacteria from the animal droppings and then that can sit there and fester in stagnant water in a cistern?
That's certainly one of the contaminants that you want to consider when you're doing active rainwater collection. Sure, like if you're putting it into a cistern. But if you filter, like for ourselves, we filter our water down to about 40 microns before we send it up into our we have kind of a main staging area with I guess 5 cisterns. And so it's already
Okay.
had debris filtered out of it, and then it's going to get utilized. It'll keep really well because it's low in organic.
Okay.
We're not drinking it, right? If you were to try and create a potable water product from that, you have to go through a series of steps where you're sending it through, 5 micron and then 1 micron filters and then UV in order to get it to drinking water standards, right? So
Okay.
it's quite expensive. Where I live, it's 30+ thousand to do a potable water system.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we are getting to the end of our time here. Does anybody have any other questions they want to ask before we sign off? Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for the excellent questions. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing your work next Monday. So thank you again for your time today. And everybody have yourself a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
See you later.